Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. I'm Mike Evans.
And I'm David Price.
And today, David, we're going to be talking about the...
Wharfedale Diamond.
This is quite left field, isn't it? We're talking about tiny little baby speakers from the 1980s.
Yeah.
70s? 80s?
82.
82. Was
Yeah.
that the first incarnation?
Yeah, there's been about 55,000 others since
I
then.
was going to say, the first of many. The first of many.
Absolutely.
But we've got some original ones here.
Yeah.
And these belong to you. You paid the
Yeah.
princely sum, I would imagine, for these.
Yeah, I think it was 30 quid.
Yes.
So they're still on eBay. Early diamonds are still on eBay for £30.
And can I ask, why are we doing a riff on £30 loudspeakers? Surely they can't be proper hi-fi.
Well, I think they are, and I think the way they sound, certainly the very original, the first couple of versions, they've got something really special about them. They're very musical, they're fun, and they don't have a great bass extension. They're not the sweetest, most extended treble, but they just do something, don't they?
And I think that probably the reason why they've sold in bucket loads was all due to that early 80s hi-fi ethos, wasn't it? The founding principles of hi-fi, which was you spend as much money as you can on the source, and then sort of slightly less as you go further down the food chain.
Yeah,
Well, I was going to say just on the principle that if you don't get the information off the record to start with, then the speakers ain't going to put it there for you.
Yeah,
and that was the plan behind it, wasn't it?
Well, it was garbage in, garbage out, wasn't it?
Yes.
Ivor Tiefenbrunn so beautifully put it. I think it was an old computer industry phrase.
Yes. Yeah.
If you put the wrong data in, then you'll get the wrong data out, kind of thing from your model or your program or whatever. And it applied very well to hi-fi. And I think in the late 70s and early 80s, you and I were both reading popular hi-fi answers, and those kind of Haymarket magazines that had guys like Chris Franklin writing for them.
Yeah.
That was Chris Franklin used to ram that thing home, didn't he?
Yes. And Malcolm Stewart as well.
Malcolm Stewart and Paul Benson and Jimmy Hughes as well.
Yes.
All those guys from that period were the kind of hip young gunslingers of the late 70s, early 80s.
Inspired us tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. They inspired us, and they used to bang on about the fact that it doesn't really matter if you had an incredibly expensive pair of speakers. If you had a rubbish turntable or a mediocre amp, you weren't going to get anything good out of it. And in the sort of early 80s, then the philosophy of garbage in, garbage out really pushed forward. So people started using Lin LP12s, which are like £500 or £600 with an arm, with £200 or £300 amplifiers like the Myst TMA3 we've just done, or the Name Nate, or
and a pair of these,
and a pair of these
tiny little Wharfedale speakers.
Absolutely. And the great thing about the original Diamonds was they cost 65 quid.
Yeah.
And so if you had £1,000 budget, you could do 500 quid for the source, and then like 400 or something for the amp, a pair of diamonds, and some cables.
QED 79 strand for 79p a meter.
Yeah. And then you'd have maybe buy a record cleaner and a copy of Human League's Dare or something.
And that was it. You were up and running.
Exactly.
I had a conversation with Ivor. I had the pleasure of going for a curry with him in 1989, and I won't do the glorious Scottish accent, but he'd said to me it was always like a negative of a photograph. He said if you get a negative and it's blurred and you blow it up, you're just going to get a big blurry picture. And he said, if you the better resolution you get to begin with, once you start expanding it, then the better the end result. And that was a very simple explanation to me in very layman's terms. And as a young kid, I got that, I understood that.
Yeah. And
that's why these were so popular. Yeah. For exactly that reason. But it did become a bit comedic as well, didn't it? Because you could end up with an LP12 with a ITOC tone arm, which was their flagship arm, and an Audio-Technica 8095 or a Lin Basic cartridge for sort of 20 quid.
Yeah.
And then a 150 quid Arkham Alpha or whatever it may be, and a pair of Wharfedale Diamonds. So, but I mean, what a great way to sort of upgrade from
Yeah.
there, you know.
Yeah.
Although ironically, Lim and Ivor would have said the next upgrade would be a Karma cartridge, a moving core cartridge,
Yeah.
wouldn't they? So I think you still have, I could imagine this sort of scenario where you have LP12, ITOC, Karma, you know, pre-power combination, and then a pair of diamonds.
Well, I expect some people actually did have that
Yes.
at some point.
Yeah.
You know, and then you go to cans from diamonds, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
So-
Yeah.
Which
yes.
is, you know, coincidentally, the diamond shares with the can. The can is basically the treble unit, the tweeter, and the mid-range B110, isn't it, of the ice barrack.
It is. Yeah. It's the top of the ice.
Yeah, it's top of the ice
basically.
barrack. And these diamonds were the top of the Wharfedale TSR 102 flagship speaker. You know,
Yes.
a very big speaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's there's a pub quiz question for you, Hi-Fi pub quiz trivia.
It was such a brilliant idea,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, you know, speakers are really hard to get right, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which is why no one's ever. There's always a compromise, but obviously, the bigger the box, the harder it is to design
Yeah.
around it, because you're
Yeah.
going to get cabinet noise and
Yeah.
resonances
Yeah.
and unwanted bits and bobs. But when you've got something this tiny, there's not too much to go wrong,
No,
really, is there?
exactly.
So and you know, it's fascinating. Because they're ported at the back. I don't know how easily it is to see that because it's black on black, but they're ported at the back. But actually, these would sit pretty much anywhere in a room.
Yeah.
I think they were probably designed to go against a wall, but if they came out a little bit,
Yeah.
then it didn't really matter too much. And,
Absolutely.
And I think they're great.
Yeah.
And-
Here's another one I prepared earlier.
That's right, we do have a pair.
So, we are stereo
Yeah,
mono
exactly.
on Hi-Fi
Yeah,
Riff.
yeah.
But the great thing is this tweeter was a really cheap 19mm Audax plastic dome. So it's not, you know, it's not a scan speak or anything fancy.
Sure.
And this mid bass unit here was the I think Wharfedale's own design, 120mm polypropylene long throw polypropylene cone mid bass, or it's a mid really, but it's
Yes.
a mid bass here. But really simple and kind of not, you know, fairly inexpensive. But the polypropylene cone was pretty, you know, it's decent stuff for the day.
Yeah.
It was, sort of at that time in 1982 would have been polyprop would have been regarded as an advanced drive unit material. But it has a smooth sound generally. I think polyprops have, and it makes for an interesting sounding speaker, I think.
Yes.
It's got a very sort of sweet sound. It sounds more expensive than it really is, doesn't it?
And that was kind of my original question, wasn't it? You know, can you really get hi-fi from a £65 pair of loudspeakers? And you know, to answer my own question, I think you probably can.
Yeah.
And we've just had a little blast with these. Haven't heard a pair of diamonds in years, have to confess, and they sound amazing.
Yeah.
You wonder where that sound is coming from. It's almost disbelieving, because it's such a big sound from such a small cabinet.
It really is. It's 5.2 litre cabinet, but it makes a big sound, especially when it's being driven by a decent front end, I think.
Yes.
You know, it's
Yeah.
Interestingly, few cheap speakers really sort of show you the difference between a mediocre amplifier and source and a good one, but these did.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And we listened to these with the Myst TMA3,
Yeah.
which we've also done a review of,
Yep.
which is one of our fave retro amps.
Yep.
And they sounded absolutely terrific, didn't they?
Really good, yeah.
We've cheated a little bit. I
Yeah.
think we have to do full disclosure. You have had these refurbed,
Yeah.
haven't you? So to sort of try and get them back to the original. You know,
Well, I've got
sound,
I like these. When I bought my pair for 30 quid, I think 5 or 10 years ago, I liked them so much that I got Anna Peach Audio to put in Russ Andrews' Kimber cable, and I think Solon capacitors in the crossover. One of the great things about the Diamond, it doesn't have much of a crossover. I think it's only 2 or 3 components anyway.
Sure.
But
Sure.
it really improved them and made them more refined sounding, but keeping that basic, very vibrant, very musical
I
sound.
bet that wasn't very expensive.
No, it wasn't. No,
It was
it
very
wasn't.
very doable.
Yeah,
without
yeah.
a doubt. So, but I just think these are just terrific. They've really impressed me. I hadn't heard them in ages. Do you know? I remember hearing, probably going a little bit off topic here, I remember hearing a pair of active diamonds. Do you remember the active diamonds they made? Which were quite well ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And you know, I was really impressed with those. And I thought then, God, however many years it was, you know, this is the future of hi-fi. And I don't think I was far out, because if you look at some of the products we've been listening to recently, like the kind of active speakers which are all networked and singing and dancing, and even things like we listened to the A1 actives recently, which we were both really impressed with. But it was the future. Yeah. They were trailblazers, weren't they?
Absolutely.
With that idea.
I mean, Acoustic Energy were telling me 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, when they were talking about the A1 active, that they weren't sure whether they should do it and whether there was a market for it, you know, because there was a big active scene in the late 70s, early 80s, but it kind of fizzled out, and you know, you had kind of Lynn and Name and Arcam and Nitec and all those kind of guys doing active stuff. So it was an interesting thing for Wharfedale to do an active diamond, which must have been about 84 or 85, but pretty much still based on this kind of era, this generation of diamond. But it was, very much ahead of its time. It didn't really catch on though.
No, it didn't. No. It didn't. But I bet if you had a pair of those and a portable DAC and a phone, you know, you've got access to hi-fi without breaking the bank.
Called Mojo Poly, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Can I do it? Can I show you the party trick? I didn't know this. David showed me this before we fired this up.
So my glamorous assistant will show you this.
So what I didn't know is you can have these so that they're on their side or on their base. And some clever person at the factory has done it so you can rotate the logo. Like, so a little spindle at the back. Yeah. So you can turn that. I think that's great.
It's very good, isn't it?
Yeah. Someone's thought about that.
Or you could remove the grill altogether and hear it sound a lot better.
Absolutely. Why would you want to when you can rotate it?
Exactly.
So, no, perfect.
But it's certainly a crowd pleaser at Lasky's, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. It absolutely was. So I'm wondering if there are many people out there who this little riff will resonate with. You know, who went and bought an LP12. And a £200 amp and a pair of these. I hope there's a few people out there who, because that's what we would have done, isn't it? Exactly that.
People are nutty enough like us to have done that sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, I think actually a lot of people would have done maybe a Riga 3 and a Riga R100 cartridge.
Yes.
And maybe a kind of Mission Cyrus 1 or Creek, Creek 4040 or a NAD 3020, that kind of thing. Yes. You know, and then had the diamonds. And then you'd have an sub £500 system that sounded great.
I bet that would. Yeah. Even with the NAD. I love that NAD amp. You had one of those.
I did.
It was a great amp. Yeah. What would be your wackiest system then if you were on those principles? Well, let me answer my own question then. So I've got a wacky system. So I had LP12 RB300. I think you'll probably remember this. RB300. Yeah. And I had an exposure. No, actually, I had my Nate at the time, and I had a pair of Royd A7 speakers, which were very sort of similar to this, a little bit bigger, £99. Yeah. But in terms of cost per unit, and it was a massive difference between the Lin and the Royds. Yeah. You know, so I literally had something incredibly similar to what we're talking about.
You mentalist, Mike.
I know, but it sounded great. And do you know what used to freak people out? And we've just done it a little bit here. You can't believe how much sound can come out of these tiny little boxes when you put something great into them.
Well, we just had the Mojo 2 and Poly going into the Myst TMA3 with these, and it sounded really embarrassingly good.
It did.
It was really fluid.
Yeah.
I mean, the great thing about the diamonds, especially the very first generation, is that they are super musical. They're not the world's most refined and in depth and extended in the bass and all that kind of stuff by a long way. But they're just fun, aren't they?
Really fun,
Lots of fun to listen to.
We listened to Scritti Politti.
Yeah.
And it sounded awesome, didn't it?
Boom, there she was.
Boom, there she was. It sounded brilliant.
It did.
And then, some of the standards, public service broadcasting, London Grammar, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, the only thing they really don't have is that extended bass. But they've got buckets and buckets of fun.
They're far better than you think for a speaker of that price and that size.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
And I think actually there's a sort of wider cultural thing as well here, because they really opened up the market in the 1980s for very high quality sounding small speakers. And Mike and I were talking about this earlier. I mean, I'm a NS1000 owner. He's an isobaric owner. And those are 70 speakers that were physically big, weren't they?
Huge, yeah.
And in the 70s, you would, the only reason you had a small speaker is that you couldn't afford a big one, basically.
Yes.
And bigger was better. And if you had a small speaker, well, it's like, well, I hope one day you'll get a decent speaker. But the Diamonds were kind of good enough in their own way to justify a small little baby mini monitor, and they were very cheap. And there were exceptions to the rule. I'm sure people will say in the comments that, oh, what about the LS35A? But that was a very niche speaker in the 70s. Most people hadn't really heard of them. They weren't stuffy things you could buy out of Lasky's very easily.
No, you had to work for the BBC.
Yes, you generally had to have a sort of a beard and sandals and a pipe and work for the BBC, didn't you?
Yes.
To have a pair of those.
Yeah.
So they weren't a kind of mainstream thing, whereas the Diamond was very much a mainstream thing. You could buy these from Comet,
Yes, you could.
Yeah. So they kind of set the template, really, for good, fun, small speakers, which the 80s really kind of, grabbed and ran with, didn't it? So you had, later on, you had the Acoustic Energy A1s, the original ones, didn't you? Which are obviously much more expensive, but again, you'd have a really chunky, high-end system with these little Acoustic Energy A1s on the end of it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So
I've got a vision in my head of I'm sure there's somebody out there who's got, LP12 ITOC Karma with, 32.5 name, high cap and 2 135s and a pair of Wharfedale Diamonds.
Yeah, that's you, Mike, isn't it?
I would love to do that, though, because it's just, because how this kind of works. People always think the speakers are the most important bit.
Yeah.
And if you've got a system that sounds great, quite often people say, how much do those speakers cost?
Yeah.
And if you sort of said, well, 30 quid from eBay, then they don't want to rush out and buy them without realising you've spent 15 grand on the front end.
Yes, exactly. Well, certainly not your other half if you're Hi-Fi fan who's married, but there's not many of those around.
They're £30, dear. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. So look, we've loved these. It's been great listening to these again.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing them out and bringing them over. Been an absolute pleasure.
Yep.
And we've got one more thing we've got to do, which is our Mike and Dave's retro riffometer out of 10. Yeah. What are you going to give the Diamonds? What are you going to give these lovely Diamonds?
It's really hard to think of a reason why you wouldn't give them 10. Obviously, considering the price and all the rest of it, it's not 10 out of 10 in the great scheme of everything. But at the price, how would you do them better? Especially when you've got
and you can rotate the badge. I'd have only given them 9.5 if I didn't realise that. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to be boring and give such high scores on our retro riffometer. I really hate giving high scores for anything, but
there's a reason why we bring them onto our retro riff, though, isn't there? Because they're we do try and bring the products we love, and have very fond memories of onto this riff. So I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm going to give them a 10 as well. What's not to like for 30 quid? What's not to like?
They're little gems. You see what I did there, Mike?
Oh, you see, I can't believe you waited till the end of our video to say that. You've been dying to say that.
I know.
That's a Mike joke.
It's not that bad.
And on that note,
on that bombshell,
thank you very much for watching this episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks a million. Bye.
Bye.